Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Instead of just an audio, I'm going to include a picture in this one, maybe a couple of pictures if you're good. The subject of this essay is why, when the globalists and the leftists seek to denounce any sort of conservative view or opinion, anything at all, for example, disagreeing with mass migration, they always lump conservative and Christian together. You rarely find that it's otherwise. So if I look at all the mainstream media, conservative Christian group, conservative group with Christian affiliations known to be connected to Nazi, they do all these association things but Christians, along with Nazi, that seems to be always put to conservative views, or what they call the conservative views, and it's just a method of shouting down the opposition to the globalist project. The globalist project is mass migration. The globalist project is emasculation of all white populations around the world, particularly working class and the upwardly mobile middle class. They're particularly the ones that are targeted for elimination. But what about this idea of conservatives must be Christians? I don't get that. It's certainly not something that I see around me. When I look at myself, I've got a lot, not all, but quite a number of conservative views. But it's a little bit more nuanced. For example, I believe in looking after forests and wildlife, so I have to have some sympathy there with some of the Green Party policies. But then I'm implacably opposed to other policies. There are certain attitude policies that I, in terms of worker and industrial relations, so I'm tend to be more towards the Democrat, Labor, trade union side of things on that. But then on many other areas, such as mass migration, such as merit-based education and so on, then I tend to be more with the right. And so very nuanced in my case. Nonetheless, let's come back to the Christian issue. I can't think of a conservative that I know, as in know personally, who is also a Christian. I suppose we can. I guess we need to separate this Christian from the pious and the devout, zealous observance of religious ceremonies and religious days and so on. And I don't have any of that. So long since I've been in a church, I can't remember. But I have been brought up in a Christian society, or certainly was at the time when I was growing up. Not so much now. And the Christian teachings, I think, satisfactorily communicated ethics within behavioural ethics within a spiritual framework, overall spiritual framework, and I think that's a good thing. Can you teach ethics without a spiritual framework? I'm not so sure. But what would be being brought up in a Christian society then? At school, for example, there was a few hours of religious teaching a week. In high school, not so much. Senior high school, it's completely optional. So there was a certain amount of religious instruction. Now, as I got older, I agreed with less and less of it, and I thought the priests and so on that came into the school, I thought they were jumping over into social politics more and more, and even as a 13 or 14-year-old, I didn't like that. I thought it made Jesus and God and religion look rather shabby when the priests, sometimes lay preachers, would do that sort of thing. For example, and I've mentioned this before, there was one preacher came to school, and I'd have been 13 or something, and said that if you arrive for work 5 minutes late, or you take too long on your lunch break, or something like that, that makes you a thief, and in God's eyes, you've sinned. I thought, no, you're crossing over into territory that's not God's territory. I would have perceived it even as a young kid or teenager. But nonetheless, I was regaled with the stories such as the religious stories such as the Ten Commandments, of course. But now the Ten Commandments were conceived, 5,000 years ago. So things like don't kill and don't steal and things like that. I mean, they're as valid today as they were then. There are a few other things that were very specific and particular to the time, and the circumstances of the times that haven't translated too well over the centuries. But the Ten Commandments, or some of them, are still, again, as applicable today as they were back in the day they were conceived thousands of years ago. Now, there are also stories like the Good Samaritan, and some of these stories had an effect. I remember one particular. I think he was a priest. I don't really know. I was quite young. I'd be 6 years old, and he would sort of animate the whole thing, and he would, when he was telling the parables and the stories, he would sort of act them out, and he would do the voices of, and the angel said, and Jesus said, and he'd do the voices. So he dramatised it, did it quite well. I mean, we were all quite mesmerised with his. He must have been a frustrated Shakespeare actor or something. But he communicated these stories quite effectively, such that they certainly sunk into my consciousness. But the idea of the Good Samaritan helping someone who is in need of help without reference to any prejudicial circumstance, like they come from a neighbouring tribe that's caused you a lot of trouble. That doesn't mean that they've been robbed and beat up and they're at the side of the road. Then it doesn't mean you can't help them get back on their donkey or give them a drink or something like that. And that's something that stuck with me. And love thy neighbour and all that sort of stuff. Also, something that had a big impact on me was Jesus, let he who's without sin cast the first stone. And that had some effect as well. And I always thought, even as a kid, I thought, Jesus, he jumps in between the mob. Now the mob wouldn't dare hurt Jesus, but even so, that was he wasn't the formidable worldwide rallying point character then that he later became. So maybe someone in the crowd was thinking, just get out the way, mofo. But those sort of things had quite a big effect on me. But I'm not a Christian. Or am I a subconscious Christian or a lay Christian once removed or something like that? Being brought up in a Christian country, do you acquire a Christian conscience and a set of Christian ethics that other societies don't appear to have? And I've travelled the world, as I mentioned, many times over on business, and in some of these third world countries, I've seen people in distress, and I've offered to render assistance, and I've been told by other locals, no, that person's they're at the lowest of the low in the social pecking order. Don't bother with them. They'll be dead in a few days anyway. Who cares? And so their fellow citizens are dismissing them as not even a piece of shit. And yet my Christian conscience tells me that person needs help. I should offer it. But again, am I a Christian? So coming back to this idea of conservatives being Christians, it's a method of denunciation. Now, the Jewish activists have a real problem with Christianity. It's a rival faith, and the Christian church has very much been at the centre of, as the Jews perceive it, and going back historically, the centre of anti-Jewish sentiment, and have been part of the crowd, the Gentile crowd. This is that runs the Jews out of various regions or countries or places, and so the Jews have this view that Christianity, particularly Catholicism, but not just Catholicism, but particularly Catholicism, really are the long-standing eternal enemy. And now I don't buy that, because the Romans and the Jews were having all sorts of problems as other tribes and people were around that area in the Holy Land, and well before the Christianity came along. So this idea that it's Christianity only, that's not it. Similarly, many of the faiths that are areas and peoples and tribes that have kicked the Jews out haven't been Christians, and were even doing this well before the Islamic faith came along in, when was it, 600 AD or somewhere around there, with the arrival of the Prophet Muhammad. So, but nonetheless, the Jews have a special place in their their propaganda perception of the world about the role of Christianity. And the view was that given that Hitler was tolerant of Christianity, Catholic. I think Hitler was a Catholic. If he came from Austria and Bavaria, that's more likely that he was affected by the Catholic faith than Protestant. But Hitler took quite a tolerant view of religion, far more tolerant, by the way, than the communist societies did. Hitler's cast as this personification of evil in every area, yet he was quite tolerant of religion, certainly compared to the totalitarian regimes of Mao and Pol Pot and Stalin and all those goons, Lenin and Trotsky and so on. So if we look at the Jewish perspective on Christianity, it's perceived as one of the great anti-Jewish evils and one of the handmaidens, if you will, of Gentile discrimination against Jews. So when we look at this association of conservative means Christian, it means Nazi, it means Hitler, it means fascist, then we can see this propaganda is very much moulded around a Jewish worldview of the persecution that they perceive they've received over the centuries. And I'm not just talking about the last 100 years, but going back many hundreds of years, over 1,000 years. So that needs to be, I think, recognised and understood. So when Christianity is attacked with conservative views, then we can see there's a propaganda narrative there that is very much built around the Jewish perception of the role that Christianity had in the as they would say, the victimization of the Jews. Now, if we look at it more widely, again, and I've mentioned this a number of times, the Jewish perception of mass migration, anyone can go anywhere at any time. The Jewish perception of the Holocaust is that if the Jews of Europe, all of them, had been able to go to migrate, that anywhere at any time migrate to another country, America or anywhere, where if they'd been able to do that, if there'd been no restrictions at all of any description, then the Holocaust could never have happened, because all the Jews would have left Europe and gone to the United States, for example, or Canada or wherever. So that the Jewish perception is that because mass migration wasn't permitted and the Jews couldn't mass migrate, that was the Holocaust. So really the Holocaust, or those guilty of it, whether directly or indirectly of the Holocaust, are also not simply the Nazi goons or whatever, but also the people who were opposing mass migration. Now, the American body politic, there's a ship full of Jews turns up in New York Harbour, and they get turned away. They go to various other places, also get turned away. Now, the view is, even to this day, this rankles with the Jewish activist class, that this was equivalent to being a Nazi goon in the Holocaust. It was the same sort of thing. You ended up feeding us to the lions. So this is still today is considered is viewed almost like it happened 5 seconds ago. Is still viewed as very much a matter that still needs to be solved and still needs to be dealt with. So when mass migration exists, where anyone can go anywhere at any time, that provides natural protection for the Jews who believe they're about to be persecuted any time, any minute now, and that there's another Hitler just around the corner waiting to pop up and cause them all sorts of harm. Now, this is more in the realms of children's imagination of monsters in the woods almost, but nonetheless, it's something that is very much held close to the. Now, given the Jewish schools and the rabbis and the synagogues and all this sort of thing, this sort of stuff is still peddled and recycled around, and so these attitudes reflect. So I think this is where because if you're against mass migration, well, that's it. You want Hitler's buddies, hey, closest buddies. And because the Christian connection go way back, then you're a Christian Hitler Nazi, and the conservative meaning that you want, the mass migration and so on. You want to conserve what you have, the resources that you have, the lifestyles that you have, the culture, the society that you have. Because you're going to conserve that. That means you're against mass migration. It means you're against tearing down the church for the hell of it. You therefore must also be a Nazi, and Christian must be Nazi, and well, what else could it be? And so it goes into this miasma attitude of the Christian and Nazi are pretty much the same thing. And so this is where we're going with. Now, I don't perceive Christianity in any way being a bad thing. Has it done bad things? Well, for sure. Let's be clear about that. But then so was Hinduism, so was Buddhism, so was, Confucian. Again, it doesn't matter where you go. So have the Jews, for example. The Jewish faith hasn't come out squeaky clean over the centuries. Look at the assassins in the Middle East back in the day, running around knifing people, half the time getting the wrong guy anyway. So this is not an issue as I see it of Christianity, but it is a reflection of the reality of the narrative that Jewish activists hold, and how this still today dominates, I think, this maniacal desire to say, we can't have mass migration till we get rid of conservatives. We can't get rid of conservatives till we get rid of Christianity, and we can't do that. And so therefore it's a series of stepping stones, as they would see it, to creating the sort of world where Jews will never again be persecuted. But anyway, Tacitus Today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.